Going to go ahead and call this June 5th, 2023 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for attending in person. We are also meeting hybrid via Teams this evening, so welcome to those that aren't here in attendance as well. Welcome Troop 36. Our first item on the agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd be pleased if you would lead us tonight in our Pledge of Allegiance. It's great to have you guys here tonight. Thanks again. For the record, we did postpone item 6D on the agenda, which was the PUD for 146-unit multifamily development on Colorado, Waverly, and Texas, and we'll hear that public hearing on June 19th, just an FYI. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Whitefish High School class of 2023. It was a remarkable baccalaureate, as well as the graduation ceremony. Craig, congratulations to your daughter, and a big shout out to my niece, Madeline, who graduated this past weekend as well. Great celebration. With that said, we'll move on to item 3, which is communications from the public. We do have 3 public hearings advertised for this evening, so if you're here to speak to those hearings, please wait until I call them. Otherwise, now is your opportunity to bring anything to the attention of the council. Your name and address for the record when you approach the podium. Any public comment tonight? Toby. Can't help it, right?
Toby Scott, 1478 Barclay Lane in Whitefish. I just have one proposal which I've mentioned to a few of you, and that's a stoplight at the corner of 13th and Baker. It's getting to be more and more every day, many, many times a day. It's like a 10-minute wait. I think that's city property. We don't have to wait for MDOT to put anything in there, or is it MDOT?
It's a city street, I believe.
Yeah, well, might see if you can put a stoplight in the budget.
Yeah. Thanks, Toby. Further public comment this evening? How about anyone online? Michelle?
For those of you who are attending online, if you'd like to speak towards something that is not on the agenda, advertised as a public hearing, please raise your hand and we'll address you. I think we're good. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll stay with the audience before we hear item 4A from the Convention and Visitors Bureau. Are there any volunteer boards from the audience? Any reports this evening? Not seeing any. You do have a request from the Whitefish Convention and Visitors Bureau to hang Friend of the Fish messaging banners, and Mariah is here to present the information contained in the packet to the council. Thanks, Mariah.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Mariah Jose. I own Nelson Hardware. I am the executive director for the Whitefish Convention and Visitors Bureau, also known as Explore Whitefish, and I also serve on the Standing Sustainable Tourism Management Plan Committee. So what we have before you tonight is a request from Explore Whitefish to hang Friend of the Fish banners, and this is part of the STMP plan and regarding communication to our visitors over the course of our busy summer months. So I'm just waiting for Michelle to.
Running out of things to say.
I don't usually have much of a problem filling space. Yeah. But I can give a little bit of background.
Sure.
As part of the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan, one of the things that was identified as a need is on-the-ground visitor information and education. And this came about mostly during the big rush directly post-COVID, when we opened back up after COVID. And we found that there was a lot of visitors to town who were not our usual visitors that we see. They needed a little bit more education on how we kind of operate around town and how we would like visitors to interact with us here in town. And this is a continuation of that program. Oop, sorry. Okay. Try and hook it up from here.
I had a question while we're waiting for Michelle.
Yeah.
If you're, the application is for 50 banners distributed throughout town. How does that compare to the number of banners we had last year as an example?
It is almost the same. The difference is just where they are located. Last year, what was available to us was more so on 93, especially heading towards the golf course. And the feedback that we got was the people were driving too fast past those areas, and so the messaging was really kind of lost in that way, specifically for the banners which we're asking about today. So the banners that the locations that we're asking for on this go around are definitely more walking traffic, biking traffic. So a lot slower travel by those rather than focused on either Spokane coming into town or exiting out of town towards the north. So they're a little bit of a different placement than they have been in years past. But general number is very similar.
So there'll be 25 on Edgewood Avenue between City Beach and like Texas area, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. Okay. So it covers the entire way from Wisconsin all the way to City Beach, and then it also covers if you go east on Edgewood towards where that walking path is as well. So it covers both sides of that, and then it covers a good chunk around Depot Park as well.
As well as the O'Shaughnessy, and then of course, that's all pretty much contiguous to Depot Park, the BNSF and library back parking lot.
And it does have that kind of back area next to the middle school athletic field where a lot of people park for farmers market.
So they won't be down Central and or on 2nd Street between Spokane and Baker?
Most of those were unavailable. When we talked to Public Works, my understanding is that most of those were unavailable for when we wanted to hang.
Unavailable for what reason?
I would have to ask if Craig can speak to what's already taken for the banners.
Central Avenue?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because of the planters, the flower pots,
Okay.
flower baskets.
Seems like we're having some technical difficulties, but the presentation is included in the packet. Are there any questions for Mariah? The designs are illustrated on what would be pages 25 and 26 of the packet, fairly consistent with some of the messaging from last year, if I'm not mistaken, Mariah.
It is correct. The only thing that we've removed is directly post-COVID, we did have some signage around masking, and obviously that's no longer cogent.
Any questions for Mariah on their request? Giuseppe, and then Frank?
Yes, thank you, Mariah. I have a couple of questions. Number one, is this the whole production and the hanging? Is it the private money of the Bureau or the public money?
This is all public funds. The entire Friend of the Fish campaign is considered part of the public budget.
So it's bed tax money that we use, comes back from the states. Thank you. And the other question is, and I'm the last one that should speak to this, being this language not my native one, but since the first time I saw it, take it slow, it kind of grinds me the wrong way, because take is a verb, slow is an adjective. So should it be take it slowly?
So I would disagree with that.
Fine.
And I think it's more probably an idiomatic use of the English language. I think that, and I can poll the room, but for those of us, when we say take it slow, I think that for a lot of us, is kind of like, no, back off, slow down. And I think that take it slowly would be, well, take what slowly? It asks for a specific thing to take slowly, rather than the it.
Is there an English teacher in the room? No, just kidding. Frank?
No, I'm not.
I do.
And I'm the worst speller in the world. I can tell everybody
I have
that
one.
now. Yeah.
Well,
Mariah,
I have an English degree.
Oh, well, there you go. Frank?
Mariah, did you get any feedback last year, or the years that we've used these, on their, what I'll call effectiveness? Or was there any way to measure that, and did we get any feedback?
The CVB has been is in the middle of a 2-year, I've lost the word, a 2-year survey considering to try and figure out how effective this campaign is, and that we are conducting that through ITRR, through University of Montana. We concluded our first year, and then we'll be doing another year here in the summertime. And how we've been doing that is by doing intercepts, in-person intercepts at the farmers market. And so from what we were able to see from the first year of the study, what we're seeing, because we also do the same messaging, we do it as geolocated advertising or geolocated things that pop up in social media. So if somebody comes into town and they're looking at their Instagram and it is tagged to them while they're in the area. And so what we have been finding is that there are a couple of messages that really resonate with a lot of people across the board. And generally that is recreate responsibly. And then what we also found is that, and also be a steward of the land, both, I think, which makes sense given what we know about our community, and I think those who travel here, those seem to really resonate with a lot of people. We did change our messaging a little bit for the digital campaigns based off what we saw on those surveys. And so we're hoping to complete the survey and then have a full survey package that we can see as to how this program is really working in terms of visitor information and visitor education.
Further questions for Mariah? Danny, you do need a formal motion considering these are being hung on city streets, is that correct?
Yes, that would be great.
I'd entertain a motion, please.
I'd move to approve the placement of the banners as proposed by the Whitefish Convention and Visitor Bureau.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Cornell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Thanks very much, Mariah.
Thank you for
Thanks,
your time.
Mariah.
City Council, volunteer board reports. Giuseppe and then Steve.
Yes, Council, Mayor, I'm pleased to report that the Impact Fee Committee has come to a recommendation that you will see at the next opportunity. The work on our side is at a place where we can provide good guidelines and good recommendation for the council to then proceed with the various stages of the next implementation of the impact fees.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Steve? Frank? Further reports? Not seeing any, we will move on to our consent agenda, which is item number 5. You do have the minutes from the May 15th included in the packets.
I'd like to remove item 5B from the consent agenda for immediate discussion.
Okay, is there a second to the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Steve, where would you like that revisited on the agenda?
Well, I said immediate discussion, but we do have a couple public hearings tonight.
You want to push them behind the public hearings,
Yeah,
just
let's do
for
that.
out of respect for those that are here for those
Yeah,
hearings?
sure.
Okay, so we'll move item 5A, B, item 5B to just after item 6C on the agenda, so it will now be 6D after our public hearings.
And I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda, items 5A and C, D, and E.
Okay, is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Rebecca?
I would like to ask to include on page 37, it's the first paragraph, second line, my comments about our NDO were not in the record, and so I would like them to be placed verbatim, as well as our attorney's comments verbatim. And I spoke to Michelle about this earlier, and this was her recommendation to correct it, and she's okay with doing it too. So
My only comment, I completely support that, Rebecca, but we need to provide Michelle some discretion in terms of verbatim, because we have adopted a short form of minute records, and so give her the discretion to maybe distill down your lengthy comments into something that the public can distill more readily, if that's okay with you.
I'd rather they were verbatim in this instance because it means a lot to me and the community, and all of them were deleted in the minutes. And so this is the only time in 3.5 years I've requested this, so.
Okay, that's fine. I'll let that go. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously as well, which does bring us on to our 2 public hearings of the evening. We'll start with item 6A, consideration of a request from Highwater LLC for a preliminary plat to develop a 9-lot subdivision located at 1600 and 1628 East 2nd Street. Property is zone WLR, which is our one-family limited residential district. And Wendy's here to present. Good
All right.
evening.
Good evening. So the applicant is proposing a 9-lot subdivision on a 4.8 acre parcel. The subdivision will be accessed off of East 2nd Street and Wild Rose Lane. There will be a newly constructed public right-of-way that will tee into an extension of Wild Rose Lane. Both will be public streets. Wild Rose Lane will be connected to the High Point subdivision on the west and will be extended to the eastern boundary for future extension, for some future development. The lots are 15,000 square feet or greater, which meets the minimum lot size and has a density of 1.86 dwelling units per acre. In addition, they're proposing a homeowners park for about 7,000 square feet near the center of the project. This project does not have a planning board recommendation because it was eligible for an expedited review because it's in city limits, is covered by a growth policy. It conforms to all city zoning and design standards. It doesn't need any variances to proceed and includes plans for extension of services. Again, the property is located at 1600 and 1628 East 2nd Street. It is currently undeveloped and again zone WLR. The property is surrounded by residential uses and the railroad to the north. The project is served by all public services and facilities. We did notice adjacent landowners. A sign was posted on the property and advisory agencies were noticed. We also put a legal in the pilot. We received 12 public comments, which are in your packet. Folks were concerned about the infrastructure installation and maintenance, possible impacts on adjacent development, high groundwater, traffic, loss of mature trees, and some questions about the expedited preliminary platting process. We review these according to the criteria in the subdivision regulations. The fire marshal has reviewed the project and will review the engineering plans. Hydrants will be extended and they will have access from the new public streets. This property, as well as all of city limits, is in the wildland urban interface. The property is quite wooded. We will ask for a condition to provide a tree preservation plan along with engineering plans. And we ask that open spaces be properly mitigated for wildland fire protection. We're also recommending 3 notes, the standard notes we always place on all subdivisions regarding development within the WUI. The property is not located within a floodplain. Access will be off of public streets. They weren't required to do a TIS because our standard is less than 200 trips, doesn't require one. And each single family home generally generates 10 trips per day, so at 90 trips they didn't require a TIS. There's no mapped crucial wildlife habitat. It is likely deer and other animals travel through this property and will likely continue to do so as they do throughout town. And we were just talking about deer stuff earlier. We did notify Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and we didn't receive any comments from them. No surface waters on the property, and it's not mapped as an area with the potential for high groundwater. The site is higher along the south property line and kind of slopes towards the train tracks. At about 10%. There's some small portions that are greater than 30%, but they aren't within building areas. There's no stormwater conveyances, no mapped wetlands. The applicant is proposing to convey stormwater from the south to the north towards a stormwater facility in the northeast portion of the project. If they propose to do infiltration, groundwater monitoring will be required. Final approval of the design, including all the calculations, is handled by our Public Works Department. Water is located within East 2nd and Wild Rose Lane. So the water will be looped through the project, and sewers in Wild Rose Lane. Again, they're proposing to extend 2 new public rights-of-way that will meet all the standards, including sidewalks, streetlights, street trees, and they will have the option to pay a fee in lieu of street tree installation. We'll also ask them to put a sign on the eastern edge of the road, Wild Rose Lane, indicating that it will be extended at some point in the future. They do have to provide parkland dedication, and due to the size of the lots, it's 11% of the net acreage of the lots. So that would require a dedication of 14,715. So it's more than 10,000 but less than an acre. So we asked them to do a homeowners association park. They're proposing a 7,729 square foot open space, which is less than the minimum 10,000. So the applicant either needs to redesign to make it 10,000 square feet, or they could pay a fee in lieu of parkland dedication, which is something that we've done in that neighborhood. The Mountain Brook subdivision, they paid a fee in lieu of parkland. The growth policy identifies this area as suburban residential, but the zoning, again, is WLR, which is an urban designation. WCR, ER, and SR is what a suburban is, but the zoning predates the land use designation. But it does comply with the suburban land use because they're proposing single family, which is what would be suburban as well. The property, again, is zone WLR. The minimum lot widths are met for the majority of the lots. There's 2 flag lots proposed in the development, which is allowed in both zoning and subdivision. The flag lots have an access road of less than 30 feet, so that area can't be calculated toward the minimum lot size, so we'll ask them to recalculate and ensure that the lots actually meet the minimum lot size. And there may need to be some slight arrangement to make sure that they meet the minimum. Again, this is following the expedited review because they meet all the criteria for that. Staff is recommending approval of the subdivision subject to 17 conditions of approval. The lots, just to hit some of the highlights, there's a lot of the standard conditions that you folks see all the time, but we'd like to make sure that they identify the clearing limits and that they show tree protection areas on the face of the plat. Lots 4 and 5 must have their areas recalculated to remove that flagpole portion. The parkland dedication either needs to meet the minimum of 10,000 square feet and pay a fee in lieu for the remainder, or pay a fee in lieu for the entire parkland. Tree preservation plan must be submitted with engineering plans, and then Wild Rose Lane extended to the eastern edge of the property and signed for a future connection. And the rest of the conditions are kind of a standard. I can answer any questions for you.
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? We'll start with Frank.
Yeah, Wendy, in light of some of the street problems we're having and some of the newer developments that are falling apart, are we comfortable with our street requirements in terms of how they're supposed to be created, manufactured, laid down, to make sure we're not going to have these kinds of problems again
Craig,
here?
answer that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, should this subdivision be approved, they will have to meet our current 2019 engineering standards, which were recently updated. They'll have to complete geotechnical work to show what the subsurface soils look like and how they'd mitigate any groundwater or poor soil conditions. So, I mean, at this point in the process, we're confident that roads could be constructed in this area that will hold up.
Great. Thanks, Greg.
Steve?
Just to be clear, Wendy, there's no accommodation for any sort of affordable housing, community housing in this project, not even a fee in lieu or anything?
Oh,
Okay,
no, we're
thank
not
you.
proposing that.
Further questions for Wendy? We did advertise for a public hearing on item 6A of the agenda. We'll hold that public hearing now. I'll invite Doug Peppermeyer, the applicant's representative, to present first, then I'll default back to our sign-up list.
Doug Pepmeyer, TD&H Engineering, 450 Corporate Drive, Kalispell, Montana. So, as Wendy mentioned, this is actually the first one of the expedited plat processes that we've done. I did see there was several public comments, and so we went through each of those. I included a letter, I think that was included in you guys' packet, just to kind of address, because all of them I was able to speak to, and I think some of it was just a lack of familiarity with this process, but I thought it was good to get that out there. And then we also reached out to the neighborhood and had a neighborhood meeting, myself and the developer, And I thought that was very productive, and hopefully we were able to address some of the concerns. But in general, we're comfortable with staff's findings. And I just wanted to let you know we're both here available to answer any questions you guys might have.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Any questions for Doug while he's at the podium? Steve?
Have you discussed at all the parkland piece, since it's a condition of approval? Are you going to just pay the fee in lieu, or are you going to try to redesign?
I have not specifically discussed that with them, but yeah, either of those options, we understand that we would need to do that to meet that requirement. And I think we did Mountain Brook as well, and that, like Wendy mentioned, that's what we ended up doing there, was the fee in lieu of.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Doug? Not seeing any. We'll take public comment now. Any public testimony, please approach the podium, and your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Lee Drogan, 209 Wild Rose Lane, so the community just below the proposed subdivision. I'm going to keep this short. My neighbor Laura is going to give a much more verbose and inclusive kind of round of questioning. Just a couple of things. One is, so the connection between Wild Rose and the proposed subdivision, and then coming from Second into the subdivision, so both sides, right? I'm a yes in my backyard kind of person. I believe that there should be more density in the city, that absolutely the subdivision should be built, but there are a lot of issues with it here that need to be cleaned up. One of which is that when you go up the hill, right, towards the dog park, that turn right now onto Ponderosa, right, is, you can't even make the left turn, you're not allowed to, right, because it's a total blind turn coming down the hill, right? So the fact that we're gonna have another road beyond that, it has the same issue. So all traffic is going to flow through Wild Rose up into that subdivision, right? So it needs to be mitigated somehow. I don't know if it's a stop sign, a traffic light. I don't think there needs to be a traffic light, but like something there, because it gets incredibly dangerous already turning out of Ponderosa, and definitely turning into that, going left, coming up the hill, or coming the other way. It's going to be a bit of chaos there. The other issue, and this already exists, but it's going to be exacerbated, is there is no sidewalk on our side of Second Avenue past, was it Armory? Yeah, past Armory, right? So you turn into High Point, which is Armory. There is no sidewalk on the left side there. So anybody who lives on Ponderosa or who's going to live in Highwater is going to have to walk all the way around through the community, specifically the kids. We have a lot of kids in our community. Going to have to walk all the way around unless they have to put a sidewalk on that side of Second, which I think they should absolutely have to. I think that's one of the most important things here, is that that sidewalk be put in on that left side. And then the last thing is, when they do the development, just don't stage the construction on the Wild Rose side down near all of our houses, right? Just stage the construction off Second Avenue. They have to build a road off Second, and they have to build a road coming from Wild Rose up into, you know, the development. Just have them stage everything to build up there instead of right in front of all of our kind of houses down in the community that isn't even a part of this HOA, isn't even a part of this subdivision. I know Laura has a lot of other things that are more technical and so process oriented, but those are just kind of the bigger, you know, very macro things.
Cool. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. Laura Webb, 69 Ponderosa Court. I don't have, I think, as much as Lee has stated that I do, but I do have some items. I think I speak on behalf of a lot of the homeowners in High Point Phase 1 and Phase 2 I've had the opportunity to speak with. First, I just would like to take the opportunity to thank Doug Petmeyer, who I know, as well as the Dodrels who are here. We did have the opportunity to speak about some of our community concerns, especially as to the homeowners whose houses or lots abut this proposed subdivision. So I think that that was very helpful. I thank them very much for that. I too, as Lee has indicated, am all for them having a subdivision. By no means am I here to stand in their way. I support it. They seem lovely, and I think it's a great place to have a subdivision. I'm merely here to speak to some specifics with regard to the application. I will also note that there are a couple of things that I was going to raise that, that we had the opportunity to speak about when we met some of the homeowners and the Dodrels and Doug. So I'm not going to go through things that I think that we've sort of discussed. There's namely one particular access easement issue that right directly abuts 69 Ponderosa and my neighbor 67 Ponderosa. I think we've resolved that issue, so I'm not even going to raise that. I'm going to speak more generally and then just sort of quickly go through the staff report. Generally speaking, I understand that there is a specific exception for subdivision applications and expedited review when there are no variances, as Wendy indicated, that bypass the planning board and go straight to city council. While I appreciate that that has been done here, I think it presents problems because I think the very purpose of having the planning board go through and sort of dot all their I's and cross all their T's and check all these preliminary plat subdivision approval conditions is a necessity so that all of the subdivisions and all of the homeowners in the city of Whitefish are held to similar standards, our subdivision neighboring this proposed subdivision. Because that step has been bypassed, I think there are some issues that would have otherwise probably been resolved, but for the fact that this is the first opportunity for us to review and comment. So I address them here in light of that. So I'm going to go as quickly as I can through the topics that Wendy addressed through her staff report. Generally speaking, I think there's a number of things that are going to be amended and changed. I do think this is very preliminary. For example, the CC&Rs, and we've discussed this, have a lot of issues. They're draft form. I don't think they're going to be used. I think they would meet a lot of objection. I'm not even going to go through those in detail because I have spoken with the Dodrels and Doug about that, and I think they're going to be sort of amended. But that said, generally, as I go through the staff report, I think my general comment, if I could leave one, would be that I'm absolutely for the subdivision, but I think that the fact that there hasn't been review, analysis, research, all of those things that would be addressed initially, but without having circumvented and expedited that review, is sort of why we are where we are. So, to that end, with regard to the floodplain, I understand the rules and the zoning with regard to whether the lot is technically located in a floodplain. I personally can speak for myself and a lot of the homeowners in my subdivision whose land pretty much is all a little bit lower than this high water subdivision will be. There is an extreme amount of high water in that area. Whether it is designated as a floodplain or not, my crawl space flooded a year or two ago. Somebody from the city came out, a gentleman who was very helpful, and indicated that he did some underground water testing, and I believe the term that he used was that there was an underground river or stream of water, and so there are significant water concerns, and I think there needs to be additional water testing. I appreciate that Mr. Petmeyer has done some significant water testing. I just think more needs to be done in light of especially certain access points throughout the subdivision that are up high, and in light of the proposed stormwater. So with regard to that's the water I wanted to address. With regard to access and traffic impacts, I understand that no TIS was done based on the 10 vehicle trips per day, which would generate roughly 90 trips per day. I don't think that's an accurate representation. I think that once there's through traffic between Wild Rose Lane and Second, not accounting for construction and connecting up what will then be 3 subdivisions, potentially more, we're looking at a lot more traffic than that, and I do think there's a lot of concern coming in and out of high water off of Second. We're not even allowed to make a left-hand turn onto Ponderosa Court at this time because, as Lee indicated, there are significant safety concerns. It's a blind spot. You're going uphill. There's just no safe way to do it. The turnoff to go left into high water that's being proposed is just a couple hundred feet up the hill from that. So I do think that a traffic impact study does need to be done, and I do think there's going to be more significant traffic than is anticipated by this report, and I would request that from a safety standpoint and a traffic standpoint. I think with regard to, I addressed the surface and groundwater, not that the staff report indicates that it's not, there's not a mapped area of high groundwater. I think there's a lot of groundwater in this particular area that needs to be addressed, and I just wouldn't want the Dodrills to run into a lot of the issues I think myself and my neighbors have run into with flooding, and have flooding in a subdivision that will be higher topographically than our subdivision, then have flooding into our subdivision and potentially throughout there. So I think that additional water testing needs to be done. I think that there needs to be additional drainage accounted for in the proposed plat and subdivision. I don't think that the way that it's proposed currently is such that everything is going to flow downhill, if you will, from a stormwater standpoint. Again, I'm certainly not the engineer, but I do think additional study and review needs to be done to investigate that draining and water issues. I think in the staff report it indicates that that final approval of the design would occur after the preliminary plat is approved, and installation of this system would be required prior to an application for the final plat. I guess insofar as this is done in advance of the final plat, that's compliant. My suggestion would be additional testing be done in advance of any preliminary plat approval, given this expedited process. In addition, finding number 3, which is I think on page 121 of the packet, indicates that stormwater will be reviewed and approved by City Public Works Department prior to final plat. Of course, that's not yet been done. Same concern, same issue with regard to the expedited process. Same goes for sewer and public works. As to the parks and open space, I think that that's been addressed with regard to setting aside additional space. I take personally no issue with that. I would like to speak to the flag lots. Flag lots in this particular subdivision, if you're looking at their proposed plat map, are lots 4 and 5. Lots 4 and 5 are directly adjacent to my parcel and my neighbor's parcels. They are 2 side-by-side flag lots which have a designated access through what will be high water drive or road. Though the staff report indicates that there is compliance and no issue with that, in the conditions of that same staff report, which can be found on, I think it's condition number 6 under the recommendations, which refer to section 11-3-14A2 of the Whitefish City Rules. Flag lots should only be utilized when all other methods of lot development fail. Flag lots are to be used in infill situations within developed areas and are not considered appropriate in areas of new development. A flag lot shall not be developed adjacent to another flag lot. So I think that the proposed subdivision parcel layout as it stands does not comply with that city rule, and I think it needs to be addressed. And my proposal would be that there be no flag lots, but most certainly there shouldn't be 2 flag lots side by side, and I think that this city ordinance precludes the flag lots from existing in their current form. So I think that there needs to be some sort of remapping of the plats as they currently exist. Other than that, I think my only other general commentary would just be that I think this is, I'm all for this subdivision. I fully support the Dodrels, and I hope that this works out. I just think there's some additional steps that need to be taken that have not been taken, whether it's because of the expedited review or otherwise. So my proposal would be that we go back to that preliminary plat approval stage and sort of evaluate and do further homework on some of the issues that I think are present before moving forward with a final plat approval on behalf of the subdivision. So, thank you. Any questions? Brian?
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Further public testimony this evening.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Spangenberg, and I live at 1665 2nd Street East. I am east of the subdivision, proposed subdivision, and I basically don't have concerns about the subdivision, but I was never invited to a neighborhood meeting, and I was noticed, so it sounds like that was mostly with the subdivision to the west of their proposed one. But my big concern has to do with traffic. I don't know how many of you travel on East 2nd Street, but I am frequently tailgated at 25 miles per hour. And I have on numerous occasions encountered cars turning illegally out of Ponderosa Lane, whether it be to turn left to go east or to turn left to go into the subdivision. So that was always my concern with that particular subdivision with that one access point. But I do believe that coming from the west going east, that it definitely is blind to traffic coming from the east, from the west, the ingress and egress. And I think the speed of traffic on East 2nd Street is excessive. I would, at a minimum, like to see some of those signs on both sides that are solar powered that show what traffic speed is, because people are definitely speeding along there. So that's my biggest concern. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Hey, Barb.
Hi, Barb Brandt, 1650 82nd Street. Our property is adjacent to the subdivision that's being developed. And as Kathy said, we weren't included in a neighborhood meeting. And I thank my neighbors so much for speaking tonight, because I'd like to have a little more input to the planning and agree with so much that was said about the safety, the sidewalks, the speed of the road. So, yeah, I just hope there's a little more input from all the neighbors. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Further public comment this evening?
My name is Jeremy Nelson. I'm in 1590 East 2nd Street. I'm right there in the middle of all the fun. This is always kind of an interesting scenario, considering in a stone's throw they've actually developed close to 60 developments within the last 4 or 5 years below us. And it's just mind-blowing how things are developing so fast around us in this community. And I'm all about progress, but man, this is in my backyard. I got deer, ponderosa pines that are just mind-blowing in our city limits, and things that would just like try to keep our Whitefish community more natural than ever. And I thought that's kind of the progress we're trying to shoot here. But yeah, I know things need to get developed, and this is going to happen sooner or later. But we have a really big scenario here where houses are getting crammed up just next to each other, and boy, it is getting tight. I mean, it's getting so tight, and you can smell someone's pie next to your window. I mean, people are just developing things like crazy. And what they're proposing here is just, it's going to be hard on my little community and my little house. We've been there since 1984. We've been part of the community. I grew up here as a child. I graduated in the Whitefish. And boy, you know, what can I say? I just want to make sure that it's going to be done right, done safe, and please just keep the hill safe. I mean, since the new giant road's been built and the giant sidewalk, it does look very pretty, but it has its issues, from snow plowing to people are driving faster on that road, to numerous deer that are not handled within the community. I mean, it's just constant hazards. So please just keep your eyes open. And as far as like the soil content, we have more clay and rock there than anyone else in the city. It's nuts. So, you know, the watershed issue, you guys got to kind of square that away. Please do some really good investigative devices on that end, please. But I thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate your comments tonight. John.
Hello, John Middleton, 1040 7th Street West. I just want to say I understand a lot of these concerns that I've heard tonight from the neighbors, and it's impossible to say that they're not legitimate. I mean, I think that for most people, it's difficult to accept the change that we're having, but I would just ask the council to consider that you know, this applicant is a local, he's invested in our community, he's a business owner. Had he chosen to maximize density and go through the PUD application, there could be at least double the number of lots that are proposed here tonight. So I think his interest in this community and the direction it's developed, at least in his small corner of it, demonstrates that he is vested and he does care, and he's not trying to cram as much in there as he legally could under certain other applications. It's also consistent with the growth policy. I think the tree preservation plan is going to help alleviate some of the concerns with regards to wildlife traversing through and maintaining the natural beauty as much as possible. But I think this is a great project, and I support it wholeheartedly, and I hope that you will agree.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Further public comment this evening? Michelle, anyone online?
Those of you who are, oh, Nick, would you like to?
Doug, we're going to stick with public comment before I call you back up.
Nick, go ahead and unmute your mic and state your name and address, please.
Hi, thank you. Nick Desimone, 199 Wild Rose Lane. My concern is specific to the omission of the traffic impact study. At the intersection of Armory and Wild Rose, there's a stop sign, and the existing nature of Ponderosa and East 2nd, where residents on Ponderosa can't access Ponderosa from 2nd, they're all routed either up Armory or Wild Rose past Armory, and making that connection to this new subdivision will obviously increase the traffic load there. The length that people are driving, you know, past the stop sign at Armory and Wild Rose, that stop sign is continually blown, high rates of speed, and a lot of people don't even bother to stop if look at all. There's a community park basketball court right across the intersection. There's a lot of little kids playing, learning to ride bikes. So I would really feel a lot better about this if there was some form of a traffic impact study done and that specific intersection looked at. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Anyone else, Michelle?
Mace, would you like to speak towards this issue? Please raise your hand. Or go ahead and unmute your mic and state your name and address. I think we're okay.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Doug, I'll acknowledge you. Do you have anything further to add based on the public comment tonight?
Yeah, so I just jotted down a couple items, so I thought I'd address those. Traffic, I agree with Kathy. I live on East 2nd Street. People do go too fast. I mean, I think the Dodgers would be all for, posting more speed signs. One of those solar ones, those are great. I feel like, I've got one next to my house. I feel like people speed up to it. It's kind of annoying. But no, I think they would share the same concerns. To clarify, I mean, I'll let Craig Workman speak to the guidelines, but I think the expedited process is getting a little blown out of proportion here. We didn't cut any corners. We did the exact same thing that is required for a subdivision. So I just want the public to understand that. There is, not a public or a planning board meeting, but you guys understand that we're still held to the same guidelines as a subdivision, a major subdivision. So just want to make sure that's clear. The intersection that is on 2nd Street was a concern, and I would venture the guess is because of sight distance where Ponderosa Court comes in. It's a restricted right turn for that reason solely. Actually, where ours is very good sight distance, and I would argue what you're going to get is people are going to skip that. They're actually going to go through this subdivision because it is a safer intersection. The ITE trip generation manual is what establishes how many trips are generated by a single family residence. I didn't do that. Public Works doesn't do that. We follow the same standards. So that is how that 90 was arrived at. And again, the process, I think John Middleton, spoke to it. We are sticking to the zoning. These are 15,000 square foot lots. They're actually larger than the lots that are in High Point. So these are pretty sizable lots. And I guess just again to reiterate, we did not cut any corners. We did exactly what we were required to do by the subdivision regulations. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Further public comment this evening? Sure. Doug, we have a question for you from Councilor Cornell. And Rebecca as well.
So your proposed road, high water road or lane, will that be at the top of the hill? Is that what you're saying? So
yeah,
you'll be able to see cars.
I don't know if it's exactly at elevation top, but it is up at the High Point, yeah.
Okay. And you can see to the east.
Yeah,
that's the concern, right?
Yep, and that's going to be something that is part of this public, the review by Public Works. Because again, as you guys know, this is the preliminary plat. We still have to go through final design and approvals. That'll be something that I'm sure is scrutinized by Craig and his staff.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep.
Rebecca.
Yep, I actually walked the property, and so I pulled in and pulled out, and it was pretty visible, but I don't think the city has any plans to do a sidewalk on that side of the road because we've already got one on the other side.
Right, the multi-use path. Yep.
So I didn't see any standing water, but there is significant groundwater is what the high groundwater is what the neighbors are saying. And so you'll be held to higher standards or?
So,
Sounds like.
Are you done? I didn't mean to cut you
go
off.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to know how you were going to handle the high groundwater. I know we have a process through the city, but it might help the public.
So we've actually already done a geotechnical investigation, and we actually did test pits in March, which is typically when we start seeing groundwater and high groundwater. The pits were all dry, but I can also tell you we all live in Whitefish. Groundwater is high. When we did Mountain Brook, we saw pretty high groundwater. Many of the neighbors testified, that they've seen high groundwater as well. It's not, like Craig said, you can deal with it, and we will have to deal with it if we encounter it. And if they have additional testing that they would require, we'll have to do that as well. But, we're fairly confident in the geotech investigation that we've already completed, that we have a very good understanding of what to anticipate.
So in some subdivisions, we have no basements. We put a condition. Do you think that's necessary on this one?
We, in our draft, I know these are draft CCNRs, we actually did suggest that. Ultimately, I guess that could be up to the owners. Engineering-wise, you can do a basement in high groundwater. It just costs a lot of money. Ben, you can probably speak to that. I don't think it's the smartest choice, but we will be recommending that they, put that in their CCNRs. But at the end of the day, you can build a basement in high groundwater if you really want to.
And also the last thing, you're required to build this in a way that does not cause trespassing onto any other adjacent properties, correct? With water.
Well, yeah, I guess just in general, the city's engineering code and I think state law says that we cannot discharge water. You get to release a historical rate. So if one unit's going on in another property, you can still release one unit, but you can't go above that. So you can't take water, divert it to where it wasn't going before. And again, that's going to be part of that public works review process, that they'll have to verify that we're not, discharging any more water than we're allowed to.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep, you bet.
Appreciate it. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'd appreciate a motion one way or another just to move this item along. Then we can take questions. After a motion, I would
After the
prefer,
motion,
please.
I'll make a motion to approve request from Highwater LLC for preliminary plat of a 9-lot subdivision.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Steve?
Quick question for Craig. Will they have enough impervious surface to require a complete stormwater plan in this subdivision?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so they will have to come up with an engineered stormwater plan to deal with the stormwater.
Yeah, they'll have to submit an engineered stormwater management plan that meets our current engineering standards.
Okay, thank you. And Wendy, flag lots, are we misreading something here?
No, when we updated the subdivision regulations, we allowed for up to 50% of the lots in new subdivisions to be flag lots with a creative design. I think, when we were updating that subdivision section, we didn't update the commensurate section in the lots. I do think through, the parkland that they're gonna have to sort out and taking out the flag poles for those 2 lots, I think it's gonna get sorted out, but I think you could clarify that condition of approval.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question back to Craig. Do we have any sort of striping where the sidewalk ends for a pedestrian crosswalk so that people can go from the south side of the road to the north side?
There is not currently a crosswalk at Armory, I don't believe.
Would that be a condition that we could add to the development, that they cover that cost, or could the city just do that, or should the city just do that?
That's a good question. Let me think about that one. I get nervous about crosswalks at uncontrolled intersections.
Okay.
I'm not sure that that's something I would necessarily recommend at this point, having a crosswalk at Armory.
Okay, thank you.
Ben?
Craig, could you address the lack of a sidewalk on the north end of Second? Should there be one?
There's not sufficient right-of-way to have a crosswalk further east of Armory. There was right-of-way dedicated for the one lot on the north side of Second, east of Armory, as part of, I guess it was High Point Phase 1, perhaps. But then there's another property that doesn't include that right-of-way. So at this point, there isn't sufficient right-of-way to connect the sidewalk from where it terminates on Armory to this new roadway.
Should we be requesting a reserve in this parcel for a future sidewalk?
Well, I mean, this property, it's essentially a flag lot in and of itself, and so we will have right-of-way to build a sidewalk on the section of this subdivision that affects Second Street, but until it connects from Armory up to, really from Wild Rose up, we wouldn't be able to do it as part of this subdivision. We wouldn't be able to get the right-of-way necessary to make that connection. I think we could have this subdivision pay potentially cash in lieu for the small strip of frontage they have on East Second Street, but there wouldn't be any way to require them to make that connection or pay additional cash in lieu down to Armory.
Do you think that as part of our pedestrian goals, we would be looking for a sidewalk on the north end of Second here? I mean, I know there's likely a number of future developments that could come to the east of here.
Yeah, I would think so. Obviously, we required it, you know, on High Point. It really is, it's only a short section of sidewalk that we have on the opposite side of the shared use path, but, you know, there's a considerable amount of distance that we'd have to do to connect it all the way back to, I think it's probably like Pine Street. But as we proceed to the east towards the dog park, I think it would make sense.
What condition would you suggest that this council adds to this subdivision to facilitate that at a future date?
I think it would just be adding cash in lieu of sidewalk on the frontage adjacent to East Second Street.
And does that need to be clarified, frontage where, like from Ponderosa to whatever this road is?
I'm not sure. I don't know that legally we can require that. I think we can only do the frontage.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're only their
adjacent to.
frontage is what we've always done.
Yeah, which is only
Because their
about
obligation
60
is to
feet.
build sidewalk, and if they don't build it, it's just, you know, along their frontage.
And sorry to monopolize this conversation about the sidewalk, but right now, the lots show that they're going all the way down to the southern property line. Is there space to actually, if you don't have enough right-of-way today, unless you get more right-of-way, how will you actually build it?
As those additional lots between Armory or
Yeah, like if
Wild Rose and this proposed roadway develop is when we would build it.
Okay.
Further questions, Ben?
No.
Any additional questions from council for staff? Would you like to add a condition to that effect?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how to do it.
I think simply you could just add condition number 18, adding a cash in lieu payment for the frontage on East Second Street associated with the subdivision.
So moved.
Is there a second to the friendly amendment, which will be condition number 18?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Steve, comment?
I have a question about that. I just, you know, that doesn't really get us very far down the road to safety, having another 40-foot section of sidewalk or even if it's 100 feet, it's going to be checkerboarded in there.
It's not going to be built, though. It's just cash in lieu.
Yeah, it still doesn't really get us anything. I would like to see a crosswalk with flashing lights at the corner of Armory and East Second, like on Baker. It seems to me that's going to provide more safety into the subdivision. We have a lot of kids that live over in that area now that probably need a safer crosswalk into their neighborhood. But, I mean, I'm for the cash in lieu, but I think we need to figure out a way to require them to upgrade or provide a crosswalk there.
Or we need to do it.
Or we need to do it. I think.
Yeah.
Wouldn't Craig normally address this during an engineering review? Craig?
Yeah, I mean, at your direction, I mean, if you want to add a specific condition, now would clearly be the time to do it, but I think you could also direct staff to, you know, to consider the crosswalk during our review.
Do you want to just add that as an amendment to your motion, which is an addition of condition number 18? To evaluate the feasibility of building a pedestrian-activated crosswalk at Armory and High Point, or Wild Rose, excuse me.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that as long as it's evaluate and not require, so that if it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense.
Is that okay with the second?
I'll live with it.
Okay. Giuseppe?
I just wanted to make sure, Angie and Wendy, when we appeal to the cash in lieu because the developer is not providing 10,000 square feet of parkland. We have an article of the city code to that effect. Is there any article of law where we can ask for cash in lieu for sidewalks or crossings? For both?
Crosswalk, no. Sidewalk,
Definitely
yes.
the sidewalk, because
Yeah.
the sidewalk is required, and that's in the subdivision regulations, and it's either you install it or you pay a fee.
And when you did your recommendation to city council, that then come to either of you as a concern?
Well, you know, we've had some projects on Colorado Avenue where they also have had a shared use path on one side, and due to narrow right-of-way, and we felt that, you know, the infrastructure was installed because the sidewalk was on the one side and it was a larger sidewalk, so we haven't required it for other subdivisions. So we felt that standard was met, and so that's why it wasn't included with the condition.
Further questions for staff? Steve?
I just want to clarify, based on Wendy's comment, in the code it reads they can either build the sidewalk or pay cash in lieu. Is that correct? And then, but we are requiring that they pay cash in lieu, or are we also accepting whether they build the sidewalk themselves?
The motion was for cash in lieu.
Okay, just want to clarify.
I think we've been told that they can't build it because there isn't sufficient right-of-way.
Correct. It would lead to nowhere. Further questions for staff? We're going to vote on the added condition number 18, which would be to add a cash in lieu payment for sidewalks for the frontage portion of the development. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Does that include
The evaluating the feasibility of a crosswalk at Armory and Wild Rose.
Yes.
Can I make a comment, I guess, just before we vote? The evaluation of the crosswalk, I find a funny condition of approval for a subdivision. That's something I think we can direct staff to do, but including that as a condition of approval. And if we wanted to include it as a condition that they have to do it, then I would argue that there's a question of fairness there, because they're not the only people that have created the need for that. There's a lot of other subdivisions that have happened out there, and these are an additional 9 lots, and be a little hard in my mind to make them pay for it. So I'm going to vote against the motion.
Andy, I find that a fair comment, and maybe it is, I guess how would you suggest, if what we want is staff to evaluate whether or not we can install one there? I'm not requiring that the developer or install it, because that's not their job. It's not on their right-of-way. It's really a traffic evaluation. What would be your suggestion to have that evaluated?
I think we would just direct staff to do that.
I'm
I
fine
think it'd be pretty simple to do. We either do that in council comments, or we do it immediately after we've settled the question of the motion. That would be my suggestion anyway.
So with that said, Ben, are you comfortable striking that request for the evaluation?
Yeah, I don't want to complicate that. I think we should strike that part of
Okay.
it, and then we should.
Is that okay with the second?
Yes.
Okay. Everyone clear with the motion? We're going to vote on the friendly amendment, which will be adding condition number 18. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 5-1 vote with Giuseppe Caltabiano voting in opposition, which brings us back to our original motion as amended. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, everyone, for attending this evening. Let folks filter out for a sec. Thanks, Troop 36. You had enough? See you guys. No, that was a good point. Yeah.
Talking as fast as I can. They're leaving for the good stuff.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 6B of our agenda, which will be ordinance number 23-9, an ordinance amending ordinance numbers 1801, 1902, 2114, which approved and subsequently amended the 95 Caro LLC preliminary plat and planned unit development to develop a mixed-use development on the former Idaho Timber property located at 95 Caro Avenue in Whitefish, and this will be on a first reading. Wendy.
All right. So again, this is a third amendment to the PUD for the 95 Caro project, which you folks have seen over the years, to establish reduced setbacks, increase lot coverage across the project. Again, you saw this originally back in 2018, and it's been amended 3 other times. Most recently in 2022, last spring, you saw kind of a re-layout of the entire subdivision. At the time of the original applications, there was limited detailed information showing the exact dimensions and locations of the buildings on the proposed lots. And the actual building design development has been occurring and has necessitated this current amendment. The purpose of the amendment is to maintain a cohesive, more urban influence type of neighborhood, keeping in the character with the original intent of the project. So they're asking for a 5-foot structural setback, 0-foot lot line setbacks for awnings and roofs adjacent to the common areas and public ways, 60% lot coverages on lots 3, 4, 5, 6, and portions of 7, and then 80% on lot 10. This is still a mixed-use PUD. The existing zoning is the WT3 and the WIT, which had more suburban type setbacks and lot coverage, and so in keeping with this more urban flavor, that's why they're requesting these changes. Previous approved zoning deviations included parking, which is shared across the entire site versus on a lot-by-lot basis. There's some buildings that exceed the building footprints that would require a CUP, and then also some of the conditional uses were approved through the PUD rather than coming in on a lot-by-lot basis for a conditional use permit. The public benefits have not changed. They're still providing public trails, public access to the river, public access to all the open space, and then they're providing public parking for the Great Northern Veterans Peace Park. So you folks know where this is at the end of Caro Avenue along the river. We did notice the adjacent landowners advisory agencies place illegal in the pilot, and we did not receive any comments. I think the neighbors know what's happening out there. The review criteria, generally nothing has changed. All the environmentally sensitive areas are still being maintained. You know, all the different things are unchanged with this proposed request. And again, the community benefits remain the same. So again, they kind of have them in categories under the PUD chapter. They're still providing public access, public facilities, rights of way, and then the overall design. The planning board held a public hearing on May 18th. The applicant's representative spoke at the hearing, and it was recommended unanimously by the planning board. So our recommended condition of approval is to recommend approval of the zoning deviations, and then we kind of encapsulate all the previous approvals in one condition of approval. So can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-9. Aaron or Casey, do you have anything to add? Name and address for the record, please.
Casey Malmquist, 160 Walker Creek Lane, Whitefish. Greetings, council and staff. Actually, I'm not going to say this too many times, but it's a pleasure to be in front of you again. If math serves me, this will be number 4. And frankly, this is intentional. So I want to give you a little bit of an update because I know it's been lots of stuff going on, but not much of it visible. LHC has been on site. We're doing the infrastructure work. We've got all the deep utilities in. We're putting in the higher dry utilities, and we'll be doing curb gutter and paving in July. So we're approaching final plat contractually, which is August 1st. So in that story is kind of how we got here is last time we were before you, we actually did a plat amendment, and in that we adjusted some lot lines. And once we kind of got those set, and that was all sort of in response to the civil work. And as we move forward then to look at going vertical, engage Montana Creative, and we started to work on the vertical, the architectural design. The other thing I think we're doing different here that I hope everyone appreciates, this is not your typical PUD or subdivision where we go and develop it, chop it up, and then put it out for sale. I have taken a very curated approach to this. We're actually working with individual people on these lots, for what they might develop in the future. So with that, we've got a lot of good detailed information, which we're sort of feeding into the architectural program. In that, we went with lots 1 and 2 to go to architectural review, and in there realized that we had some issues with the setbacks, and in that discovered that the plat amendment didn't really get conveyed into the PUD. So that's part of what's happening here, is a bit of a procedural thing. But really, it's a lot of this is just driven by the architecture and giving us some freedom to, the other thing that Wendy noted was the off-site parking is, with the work of Montana Creative, we actually are creating a fair amount of parking on the lots for the specific buildings, which is, in my mind, a benefit to the overall development. So it's, we're asking for some design latitude to create really, honestly, the best project we can there. That's why we're here.
Great, thanks, Casey. Any question for the applicant? Rebecca?
So the setbacks are only 5 feet, Casey?
Yes, what we're asking for is a minimum setback of 5 feet, and that only occurs in a couple places.
Okay.
And the 0 setback would never occur between 2 lots. It is, I don't know how much you recall, but we're really not impacting anyone around us. We have the Peace Park to the west, we've got BNSF to the north, we've got the river to the east. We do have, some development on the south, but we also have the First Street abandoned right-of-way. So never would we have a 0 setback building to building, but there's 2 or 3 buildings that we're looking for a 5-foot setback. So other ones we've got, hundreds of feet. It's really kind of the site responding to the design.
And the only thing I thought of was fire, like fire jumping from one building to the other. So will they be sprinkled?
These meet those standards.
Okay, all right.
That's what it does.
Thanks.
Giuseppe, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was going to make a motion if we're done with the question.
We have to take public testimony first. Quite all right. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you.
We'll take public comment now. Any public comment this evening? Michelle, anyone online? Thanks. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Giuseppe.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve WPUD 23-01, the findings of fact in the staff report and the one condition of approval as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board on May 18, 2023.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Would you like to speak to your motion? Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Casey. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item 6C of the agenda, which will be Resolution 23-7, adopting our annexation plan for the city of Whitefish. Dave.
Good evening. So something we've been working on for a while. We had a couple work sessions with the city council about that. But currently our annexation policy is wrapped up in our extension of services plan, and we made a determination it'd be better to have a standalone policy that was easier to find and maybe a little more fleshed out than what's in that plan. And so we provided you a draft annexation policy. I'll kind of go through it pretty quickly. It's found on page 340 of your packet, if you're not there already. As you know, annexation is the process by land which is currently in Flathead County becomes incorporated into the city. And most of the time it's because someone wants services, so they petition us to annex. There are other times when properties become wholly surrounded, and it's in the city's best interest to annex them, shall we say, involuntarily. And so this provides some guidelines for the council. They have the properties that do get annexed have to be within our urban growth boundary. That's part of our annexation policy. And then there's certain specific policies within the Montana statutes that have to be followed when annexation occurs. And we gave some flexibility within this. There's a section that says the city council shall have the authority to waive guiding principles of this policy in order to continue to best provide the continued delivery of efficient services and maintain orderly development for the health, safety, and welfare of all the citizens within its jurisdiction. And the council may approve, deny, or conditionally approve petitions for annexation based on the following criteria. So those criteria, you look at evaluation criteria. Does it contribute to the logical growth pattern of the city by creating orderly and contiguous municipal boundaries? Does it fill in gaps left by previous annexations that maybe created islands or non-contiguous boundaries? Does it take in properties that are already connected to city water or sewer? Because when someone connects, we do have the right to either annex them or make them sign a waiver that they won't protest annexation in the future, because there are times when it's maybe not in the city's best interest to annex properties. And then in other areas that are priorities are where the proliferation of on-site septic systems may pose a threat to water quality in environmentally sensitive areas. That's where we maybe looked at Line Mountain as a potential due to some of the effluent that seems to be leaching into the lake from that subdivision. And then areas advantageous to residents of both the annexation area and the city as a whole. Any areas that would provide additional community housing. Areas where property owners are generally favorable towards the annexation, like perhaps they petitioned us because they need services. And then areas where there are existing annexation agreements or signed petitions, signed waivers of protest. Areas that are already on our services, such as Rest Haven and maybe even Big Mountain. There's some areas that aren't desirable, so we can only extend services in situations that help reach city planning goals or address environmental issues. Or require the property owner receiving city services to sign a waiver. And as far as public improvements, any extension of water or sewer mains and connection to services are at the expense of property owners. The city does not pay for that. If you want water and sewer, you're going to have to pay for that. However, you can, if you are extending it a long ways, you might be able to do latecomer agreements with other property owners that may wish to connect. Property owners might continue to rely on private wells or private septic systems. They're not required to connect unless they're upgrading or expanding. And then any private roads or utilities need to remain private after annexation unless road right-of-way is needed for future transportation grid connectivity. And if they remain private, the cost to maintain the existing infrastructure will continue to be borne by the property owners or the HOA. And so that's sort of a general. We have some other priorities in there, looking at costs and benefits, compliance with city plans and policies. When we're approving them for approval, we use multiple statutes under the MCA, Montana Code Annotated, that we can approve them under. We recently added the zoning upon annexation based on state law to that, so that's something that we added to this. And then one section on here under E, the city reserves the right to condition annexation approvals, something that other cities do, such as Missoula. Those conditions can include required upgrades to existing streets and utilities and other infrastructure. Conditions can include a requirement to provide access and utility easements. That's something the first zoning annexation that's going to come to you guys is going to have a condition on there that they provide a 30-foot access and utility easement. Conditions can't include approval or denial of development plans that would require conformance with other code criteria or review processes beyond the zoning map amendment review criteria. So once something's annexed, our municipal boundaries are changed, and then we have to change the property from a county zoning district to a Whitefish city zoning district. And so the last section is the criteria that we use for that, and that's based on state law. So it either has to be consistent with our growth policy, which would be our future land use map, as well as adjacent zoning of the same future land use category, and or the closest city zoning equivalent of the prior Flathead County zoning. And so any of those things that were annexation petitions meet the criteria, they can qualify for an expedited process, which you guys are familiar with. We just went through that zone change, where the zoning upon annexation, the zoning and the annexation are approved simultaneously by the council at a public hearing. So that's kind of the gist of that. We also included in there a copy of our urban growth boundary map that shows those areas where we can annex, we've determined that we can provide services to, and then some frequently asked questions. It's really just for the public when they want to annex. It answers some basic questions that people have about what annexation means and what they're required to do. So that's the gist of it, and be glad to try to answer any questions. Angie and Craig and I also are available. So,
Thanks, Dave. Steve?
Dave, is there anything in the last part you said that there were several criteria? Is there anything that paints us into a corner where if, for example, we annex a property and the future land use map has two possible zones, is there anything that paints us into a corner of choosing one zone over another?
well, I think that's entirely at the council's discretion. If, most of the future land use map, land use categories have several different zones that could go in that category, and you guys are certainly free to choose which one to apply. I mean, generally, what we look at is, what are the adjacent properties zoned that have already annexed in the city, so that you're not creating like a spot zone of, one property that's zoned something different than that around it. And most of the time, there's a pattern that's already occurred in somewhere,
Okay. My question is if the most close county zoning does not, we don't agree with the most closely related county zoning, we're saying that council still has discretion to zone it something different.
As long as it's consistent with the growth policy.
As long as it's consistent with the future land use map.
Yep.
Okay, and Angie, that's your same analysis as well. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Further questions for staff? Ben?
Angie, you have told us before that you believe under state law this council can turn down an annexation for any reason.
Well, on its merits, I didn't say
On
for
its
any
merits.
reason.
Do you think this document changes that view? And the related question is, do you think there should be some language in here to give council more wiggle room should we disagree with an annexation for any reason?
I don't think so, Ben. I think it's kind of a fluid document. I mean, state law is, of course, going to govern over any sort of policy that we just put in effect through a resolution. With respect to annexations by petition, you can deny them, again, on their merits. I wouldn't suggest you do it for any reason. Please don't say stuff like that in public, Ben. But, I mean, if you do have good reasons why you simply don't want to annex a piece of property, you guys are not required to you're not required to take property into the city. I think it's a pretty fluid document. I think it gives you guys quite a bit of discretion. I like the portion about putting conditions on annexations. I think I've told you before, annexation law is pretty old, and it doesn't specifically say you can condition annexations, but it doesn't say you can't condition annexations too. And like Dave said, there's a lot of other cities that are doing it. So ultimately, if you wanted some things out of the landowner and, in return for being within city limits, I think it gives you the discretion to do that. But I will tell you, under state law, you can deny an annexation. You don't have to take people into city limits if you don't want that piece of property. If it doesn't make sense for the city. Let me see.
Okay. Well, that was actually my next question was about the annexation conditions. So there's a short list in here. It says can include, can't include. And I could probably think of all sorts of other things that wouldn't be in that list. Do you think, what if there's some out-of-the-box condition that for some reason makes sense that's not in that list of three things?
I don't think this is all-inclusive. What I would tell you is if you're going to condition an annexation, you would want it to be reasonably related to like a conditional use permit for the perceived detriments of taking this property into city limits, or to provide some sort of greater good for the city. But it does have to kind of be related to that. I mean, if you're going to annex a piece of property south of town and a condition of annexation is they provide a park off of 2nd Street, I would caution you against doing that. Yeah. Kind of has to be related to the parcel that you're taking, the perceived, alleviating any detriments that might be caused, or providing for a greater good. So it actually makes sense for the city to annex the parcel.
So how come everything you just said, would we not just write that into this document?
I think, again, our intent was for it to be a fluid document. I mean, I don't think that we could sit here and think about every condition we could ever place on an annexation, because circumstances and properties are so different.
Sure.
How about a provision included but not limited to?
We can add that, sure.
And my last question is, in the last sentence, it talks about if the applicant, in the scenario where the applicant wants to pursue a zoning that is different from what is in our growth policy map. It says we would take the annexation and then deal with the zoning assignment at a later hearing. Why would we not still take those at the same time?
We're kind of confined by state law about when we can do the zoning upon annexation. So what we've spoken a little bit about, and part of the reason that we did institute the zoning upon annexation is there's this like 3-month, 2-month lag. So, you know, it was in the city, but it was still zoned county. And Dave and I've kind of talked about, and did we put it in our ordinance about doing interim zoning? Yep.
Yeah, that's in there. So the very last line of that, if annexation, they want to pursue something different, they have to apply for a growth policy amendment or map amendment. In that event, the city council may adopt an interim zoning. So you guys could place a zoning on there and say, yeah, that's fine, this is what you want to have. And if you want to come back and ask for something different, this is what the growth policy says, you're going to have to do a growth policy amendment. And if that passes, then sure, we'll entertain you changing the zoning. But this is what you get for now.
But wouldn't that just lead to another situation like we had recently with the gentleman on 93 South? I mean, wouldn't we, if somebody wants to do some zoning assignment that's different than what we envision, wouldn't we just want to take that at the same time? So they're not committed to the annexation without having the zoning they're looking for?
I mean, I think that when someone applies for something, I mean, they basically, you know, tell us what we want, and if it's something outside of the scope, you know, if it doesn't match up with the adjacent zoning and it's not consistent with the growth policy, we're like, sorry, you're not going to get that. I mean, you can come in for a separate process. I mean, you can choose not to annex them, knowing that, or you could hold off on the annexation, basically, and say, yeah, you know, come back through that process, and then we'll entertain your petition to annex again when, you know, if that gets approved, if that's what you're set on. But you also have the right to, you know, annex them and put an interim zoning on there, and they can make do with that, or, you know, try to change it through the normal process.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions for Dave? Not seeing any. Steve? We did advertise for a public hearing on Resolution 23-7, and we will hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony in this item? Michelle, anyone online? Go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Steve?
I move to approve Resolution 23-07, a resolution adopting an annexation policy.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Does that imply the addition of included but not limited to, per Frank's suggestion?
Yes, that does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. That brings us on to added agenda item 6D, which will be ordinance 23-08 that was lifted from the consent agenda. We will need a motion from someone who voted in the affirmative at the last meeting to reconsider the ordinance.
So moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Who would like to begin?
I have some questions I'd like to ask staff
Please.
first, if that's okay. My first question, and I think if I'm not mistaken, based on my poll of other counselors, the main thing that we're considering is whether duplexes should be exempt from this. Is that correct? Would I be correct in that? Okay. So my questions for staff are all kind of related to that. And Dave, if I'm not mistaken, at our last meeting I asked, and you said that duplexes are currently are exempt from our current landscaping requirements. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so adding them in to this one is a change. Okay, and then I'd just kind of like some legal advice from Angie based on new legislation where we stand with that.
I believe that you cannot treat duplexes differently than you treat single-family residences. And if we're not requiring landscaping plans for single-family residences, we probably should not be requiring them for duplexes as well. And that was signed into law as far as I know. I think it was after you folks met, but.
So if we change the law, if we change our resolution to read, to not exempt any land use from our landscaping requirements, then we can require duplexes to meet those.
Say it again, Steve, I'm sorry.
If we include single-family homes, then we can include duplexes, but if we don't include single-family homes, we can't include duplexes, is that?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was getting at, okay. And then I just had one typo error that I found today. 11-4-1A 3 should read mitigate instead of mitigation. That's all I have.
I think it's a substantial change from our original hearing to include all single-family homes. So is that what you're asking for?
No, I'm not. There's no motion on the table right now to approve as is or to change in any way. So this is just discussion right now.
Yeah, I'm in favor of including an exemption for duplexes to keep us current with the new law, but I would find it very burdensome for all the single-family homes and duplexes to be compliant with our new tree retention policy. However, I would like staff to maybe consider educational materials for people building homes to guide them towards what we're hoping for as a city on a voluntary basis.
Giuseppe, do you have a question?
I do. As you all know, I'm confused about the ordinance, and I'll take an example here. 11-3-43.
Page number, please.
Oh, I have the ordinance from the last meeting. I'm sorry. Alan, can you help us with the page in the packet? It's the one that talks about orientation of the building.
It should be under the consent agenda.
So this part, as an example, speaks to building orientation and multi-building sites and defines how the building should be oriented. Isn't this in the ordinance that it?
11-4-3, I believe you indicated.
11-3-43. I'm reading the last meeting when the ordinance was presented.
Alan T. from Mike Long Range Planner. Are you referring to maybe one of the other supporting chapters that we're moving language over from? That's what it sounds like, maybe multifamily or?
Yes.
So all of that language is existing, except that we're either striking duplicative language or we're taking language already in and moving it into the landscape code. That's one of the reasons why it got longer, is we've combined a bunch of existing language into the code.
So did we put that language into the new ordinance?
What was the actual language? I can't.
It's building orientation and multi-building sites. 1, orientation. Buildings must be oriented towards the primary street frontage and public paths and/or sidewalks. Building on corner lots should be oriented towards the primary intersection, and so on.
So, sir, that's not even being touched as part of the landscape code. That's just one of the sections that has some landscaping language, but that part's not being moved at all. That's not relating to landscaping.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments?
I'll make a motion.
Please do.
I move to approve, oh boy.
Ordinance 23-8.
Thank you. Ordinance 23-8, and with the addition of striking the language that includes duplexes into
So
the
Steve,
landscaping code.
that would be in 11-4-2A,
Yeah.
and it says single-family dwellings, and you would just add "and duplexes are exempt." So
Yes.
you would just add the words "and duplexes" to that.
duplexes. Thank you. I had that somewhere and I lost it. That's my motion.
Thanks, Steve. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to, if I could speak to that. We have to be careful about understanding what what including duplexes would do to the cost of building duplexes, because this is, to create a full landscaping plan to build one duplex or one single-family home is burdensome, and it costs a lot of money. And if you look at all of the things, if you read through the chapter carefully and see all of the things that you have to have in a landscaping plan, it's going to require hiring somebody to do that. And that's, and duplexes are probably our most affordable ownership housing product that we can build in the city right now. So that's the reason why I would like us to exempt duplexes. I understand the need I understand the need for tree retention, and I'm sure Rebecca does as well, probably more so than I do. And I understand the need for making sure that we preserve the community character of our neighborhoods. I don't see that duplexes are going to, by requiring duplexes and single-family homes to adhere to these new requirements, just feels like overreach to me.
Thanks, Steve. Further comments? Giuseppe?
I was just going to say just
No,
one.
go ahead, Andy. Go
I was just going to say one quick correction to the motion, and you didn't include Stevens on our second reading, so.
I didn't catch that, Andy, sorry.
It's ordinance 23-08 approved on a second reading. So we just said approving 2308, but it's actually on the second reading, so.
Okay. Ben and then Giuseppe.
Yeah, I didn't comment on this motion last time, so I will now. You know, a lot of duplex projects tend to be done on small lots, and in practice, you're going setback a lot of the time, and you're just taking the trees out. It's just part of the process. And I think that this type of landscaping ordinance is best applied to large development projects. That's where it really matters. The smaller the project is, the more cost burdensome it is to the owner who's trying to do it, and the less impactful it is to the community. And I just don't think the cost benefit is there really at all for duplexes. And to be honest, I would say triplexes as well. And if anybody else supports me on that, we can go down that path. But anyway, I just think that it does cost thousands of dollars, but to comply with this. But if you're doing a large project, you're doing it anyway, and so it's not burdensome really to me at all. So anyway, I think we should all support this and move on.
Giuseppe.
Yes, and I was going to comment on the fact that if we go down that line, we should include duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes. So if you're going to triplexes, I'll support an amendment for triplexes and even quadruplexes at this point.
Would you like to make that motion as a friendly amendment?
Yes, I'd like to move. Hold on,
I'll second a triplex, but I wouldn't a quadplex.
Okay, then for the record, I will move to add an amendment to the current motion on the table to add to that wording triplexes and quadruplexes.
Is there a second to the friendly amendments?
I will second.
Seconded by Councilor Davis.
Oh,
David,
wait, I'm sorry. You said triplexes and
Triplexes,
quadplexes.
yes.
I thought you said duplexes and triplexes.
do you withdraw your second?
I withdraw my second.
Is there a second to the motion? Motion fails for lack of a second.
Do we see a lot of single triplexes built? I mean, that's my concern, is that triplexes and quadplexes are usually part of bigger developments rather than...
I've built single triplexes before.
Have you? Okay.
Dave, would that be specific and again referenced in section 11-4-2A?
Yep, you would just add, if that was
And
to
triplexes.
pass, single-family duplex and triplex, yeah.
Okay. Rebecca?
I think it's a substantial change not going through a public process. And the other thing is, we are correcting this because we know we were non-compliant with state law. So I feel like it makes sense to proceed with duplexes, but I don't think I'm going to support the triplex thing.
And hence is my point. I think we need a little work session on this and with the public involved, and then decide how to go. I was stretching the point to show that if we start discussing down the line, you are corroborating what I'm trying to say. My original motion would have been to postpone to date certain and ask for in the calendar. Dana is shaking the head for a work session on this, so we're all clear and the public is clear on what we're trying to do.
Briefly.
We knew after the public process, because we were informed by someone that gave testimony, and we remembered too, that had been changed at the legislative level. So I felt like this was almost a housekeeping correction. But if we keep adding more density, I think it is substantial. But I'd rather just get it passed. We can always change it with a text amendment later if we want to increase more, but I think it still would need to go through the public process.
We'll go ahead and vote on the friendly amendment, which would exempt triplexes per section 11-4.
Mr. Mayor, there was no second to that.
There was no second?
No second.
Excuse me. I thought you had made the motion.
I haven't. Well, you made a motion for tries and quads.
Correct.
It did not get a second.
I'll make a motion to exempt triplexes
And
from this.
I'd second it.
No seconded by Councilor Caltabiano. Further discussion on the friendly amendment.
Mr. Mayor, I will not support the friendly amendment. I agree with Rebecca's comments on this thing. What we were doing here this evening was correcting what amounted to a legislative error that we made because of new legislation. I'm not interested in expanding this further than that.
Thank you, Councilor.
Concur with Rebecca and Frank on that.
Thank you, Steve.
Just educationally, once we reconsider a motion, I don't think there should be an expectation of where the discussion and the vote will go, even if we talk about correcting a housekeeping issue. Am I correct?
It's very common for councilors to express their opinion before the vote comes down, actually.
you.
So it's quite all right. It's a legislative
No,
item.
but I mean in terms of expecting that we shouldn't change more of the ordinance just because we were discussing only to correct that legal issue.
Yeah, we can do that, Giuseppe, but we also have to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak to Giuseppe, but we can change things legislatively if we feel like there's a valid reason for it. You can do that. You can make a motion, and if you get a second, you can do it. But we also protect the public process and make sure that the public is always a part of our decision-making. And sometimes if we introduce something at the last minute, they are left out of that option, so.
Angela, just for clarification, since this is an ordinance, does an amendment require a supermajority vote?
We thought it did the last time, yeah.
So to be
But
consistent.
there's nothing, Michelle and I have looked and looked and looked and looked, and there's nothing in Robert's rules, and
So we'll be consistent and assume that it does.
yeah, and so the supermajority, just so you guys know, for ordinances, it's not grounded in state law or Robert's rules. It's actually grounded in our city code, which is interesting
Very.
and kind of unworkable, sort of.
Right.
A lot of the time, so.
Thank you. On that note, we will vote on the friendly amendment, which would amend 11-4-2A to exempt triplexes. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign, and the motion does fail on a 4-2 vote, which brings us back to the original motion, which includes exempting duplexes per 11-4-2A and adopting 23-08 on a second reading. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 5-1 vote with Councilor Caltabiano voting in opposition. Under our consent agenda on page 115, we had a request from Chief Kelch to certify Police Officer Jonathan Works, who completed his one-year probationary period pursuant to state statute MCA 73-32-4113-2. Big congratulations to Jonathan. Thank you, Bridger, and your department. So I'll entertain a motion to that effect, please.
Didn't we approve it in the consent agenda?
It doesn't need a formal motion. It was requested in Bridger's staff report. I thought perhaps we needed
I
one.
think because it was included in the consent agenda and wasn't pulled from
Okay,
there.
that's fine. Well, congratulations anyway. Great. Thanks, Bridger. We'll move on to communications from Travis this evening. Item 7A, consideration of request to award a contract for an airboat as a rescue boat. This is on page 348 of the packet. Welcome, Travis.
Welcome, Council. Hey, I'd like to make a recommendation after speaking with the department that Joe is now leaving on leave and retiring. This boat isn't what we wanted, so we would like to make a recommendation that you do not award this contract. We'd like to bring it back to the drawing board.
Understood. Times are changing.
Yeah, and I know there's BNSF gave us a $20,000 grant, and we got an extension on that, and they said it was good for however long we needed. So we will still be awarded that grant.
And the reasoning for delaying the award, Travis? Or do you not want to get into that right now?
Just not the boat that we had spec'd out initially.
Okay.
We felt like that it kind of got fast-tracked, and after speaking with most of the members, they don't want this boat.
Okay. I appreciate the candidness. With that said, do we need a motion to deny?
So, yeah, motion would be to
Not award.
not award the
Okay.
contract and go out to bid for a different.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I recommend, actually, I move not to award a contract for the near-built airboats for the fire department.
And to go out to bid, rebid?
Sorry, and accordingly go out to restart the process.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you,
we'll
Giuseppe.
restart it, and we'll come back to the drawing board with something different.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Cornell. Further discussion? Travis, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And that carries unanimously. We'll move on to item 8. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for our city manager? Dana, anything additional to report on?
I do. One thing I want to just clarify is that the June 19th work session will now be a legislative update with our planning department regarding all the land use code changes that need to be coming forward. We'll be seeking some direction on some of the items. We'll move that strategic plan to July for the work session.
Okay.
And then one last thing, it's actually really great news. The city with BNSF applied for a railroad crossing elimination grant to study our 3 at-grade crossings. We were awarded $400,000
Wow.
As partnering with BNSF. Our contribution will be $25,000 and BNSF will be contributing $75,000. And so we're excited for that project to proceed. And so we'll make budget amendments to that effect. So thanks to everybody who helped work on that grant application and BNSF for working with us.
What improvements could result from this grant, Dana?
So right now, this is simply a study, and Craig probably has more information that he could share, but it's a study to improve safety. It's looking at 3 at-grade crossings and the viaduct, and it's to study them. Craig, do you want to add to it what that means? Looking at safety improvements. I know looking at going under, where can we eliminate at-grade crossings, because those are safety risks.
Is the $500,000 just to do the study?
Just the study.
Craig?
Yeah, so the intention is to eliminate at-grade crossings. So this could potentially add an overpass or underpass at one of the other 3 at-grade crossings at East 2nd, at Birch Point, or at State Park Road. Or it could also result in an additional overpass at some point within the city limits. So. Or
Good news.
underpass for that matter. So yeah, it's exciting.
That's great. Congratulations. Thanks, Dana. Anything additional?
Nope, that's all. Other than our new acting fire chief, Travis, will be with us through July 5th, which is Joe's retirement date.
Okay.
So.
Thanks, Dana. Welcome, Travis, although he stepped out of the room. We'll move on to item 9A. I think we've addressed Jan's letter, unless there's other comments. I think Bridger addressed this during our goal-setting session. With that said, let's move to councilor comments, and we'll start on the right this evening. Giuseppe, anything to close out our meeting tonight? Thank you, Giuseppe. Steve?
Just two things. First of all, thank you to everyone who participated in the Hit the Trail Challenge out on the Whitefish trails. There were lots and lots, I didn't get the final statistics yet, but lots and lots of participation out there, raised a lot of money for our trails. And Bridger, now that we're currently under construction almost on Caro, is it possible to get one of those temporary signs that shows how fast you're going? Because people are really bombing down. Today I was coming home from school. They're working on the road. There was a girl who had just gotten dropped off by the bus walking down the left lane with traffic, and people just not really paying attention. So
Is there a location along Carroll that means you're out there quite a bit where you think
yeah,
it
I
do
would
its best
say
work?
going north for sure.
Okay.
And then maybe I would say somewhere where it's not going to be flashing in people's windows, which would be further north, just like towards the bottom of the hill by where that road comes out. There might,
Yeah,
there
and I
might
can
not
turn
be
it
any
off
room
to
over there.
not work at night. It'll still keep the traffic and those type of things, the stats, but it wouldn't flash at night.
Okay, I would suggest maybe right across, right next to the fourth tee box there, in that, because it's nice and wide there, where you can probably fit it off the road and out of the way.
I program them. Craig's crew moves them.
Oh,
Craig,
okay.
can we get that moved?
Thank you.
Will do.
Appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Steve. Frank?
Nothing this evening.
Thank you, Frank. Ben?
Yeah, Craig, I was wondering if you would mind throwing out an opinion on Toby's comments about the intersection of 13th and Baker, because I do think I agree that the level of service is pretty low there sometimes.
Yeah, level of service has been extremely low in the last, 8 months since we have been working on the Spokane Avenue water main, which I'm happy to report we're done with our end of it. So the state has work to do this week and next, and then hopefully that will be a thing of the past. I don't think that intersection lends itself very well to a signal, an actual traffic signal. We didn't study it in detail in the transportation plan simply because we anticipate that it'll be folded into a future additional phase of the downtown Whitefish Highway study when MDT and the city come back to the table on that. I think it could potentially be a good spot for a roundabout, but we'd need additional right-of-way in order to do it. I think right now the four-way stop is the best means of traffic control at that intersection.
But it's not in the transportation plan at all, upgrades.
It's included in the transportation plan as part of the downtown highway study narrative that we have, which doesn't show a particular solution for that intersection. It simply shows, three lanes, 2 lanes south and 1 lane north on that section of Baker Avenue, and then it would be 2 lanes east and 1 lane west on 13th. And so when a project of that magnitude, comes to fruition, obviously we'd need to, look at the control of that intersection. And at that point, it could be a signal or potentially a roundabout.
Thank you.
There's no doubt it's an issue, but I think it's certainly being exacerbated by the construction
No
on
doubt.
Spokane. So hopefully the level of service will bump back up.
Yep. I did want to make a comment on our discussion in the council goals about short-term rentals. Quite candidly, I kind of hate talking about short-term rentals. I feel like we talk about it, or enforcement specifically, I think we talk about it too much, and I don't think it's the main cause of the problems that we have. However, I do think that we should have at least some basic level of proactive enforcement efforts. I know that this council has directed that in the past, and I think at our last housing meeting, committee meeting, there was a motion made and passed to suggest to staff and council that we follow through with our short-term rental enforcement plan that we already have. And so I'm just passing that along because that's what the committee asked to do. But I would also say I think I'd like to see us follow through with it now that everything's settled, and then hopefully we don't have to talk about enforcement of short-term rentals ever again.
Thank you, Ben. Rebecca?
Just have One thing, it's for Maria. Someone in the Whitefish Manor approached me about the trees at the Riverside Park detention pond. She felt like some of them still needed to be cut back. Okay, I knew you would know about it, but she was kind of worried about walking around there and,
Yeah, there's some remaining work to be done after the storm that we had last fall, and we have some quotes to have that done. We've been working with the insurance company. Staff has been working slowly on what they can do, just the two of them, to clean up, but there's a lot more work that would require contracting some of it out, so.
yeah, that's what I thought. We needed to probably hire that out because they're so big and high. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Andy?
Only one comment. I'm glad to see some crosswalks getting painted. It's amazing, once those things are nice and bright and white, how they stand out and really let you see pedestrians a lot better and give pedestrians an idea that they're not supposed to walk out from the diagonally parked cars in the middle of the road, hopefully, but there you go, so.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. I had a few items, just a reminder of our June 12th budget meeting. I apologize for my absence at our last meeting, and that starts when, Dana?
That will start at 5:30.
Okay.
We'll have the agenda out later this week.
Great. Will everyone be in attendance for that meeting? Steve will be absent. I will be here. I'll be here. Okay. Great. So it looks like we mostly have a quorum. Okay. Quite all right. Second, Travis, you stepped out of the room, but just congratulations on your promotion to acting chief. It's great to have you on board. Look forward to our work session here in the next couple weeks regarding the strategic plan.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet. Spoke to Angie and Craig and Dana and Maria briefly about this today. I really don't want to dive into the details, but some issues have arisen with the Caro 95 project and specifically the bridge that was a part of the approval process, the pedestrian bridge over the Whitefish River related to some of the BNSF easements. And again, I don't want to dive into the details tonight, but Casey's been working with staff very diligently and cooperatively to address some of the issues that do need to be addressed, largely related to the easements with BNSF. And I think it warrants a work session because Casey's purchased and is ready to install the bridge, but there's some details that we need to work out from a legal standpoint with Angie in particular. I think staff supports the request for a work session, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, John, we do. When we met with Casey and Bruce and Doug 2 or 3 weeks ago, it became readily apparent that staff is not at all on the same page as they were, and we want to make sure council is on the same page as well with respect to that occurring. That bridge and that path on the eastern side of the river was not a condition of approval. You folks might have been very aware of it. I will say as staff, I was not until the BNSF license agreement ended up in my inbox. So I definitely think we all need to be, and I think Craig and I made that apparent to Casey, that you really need to make sure that council's on board and actually knows what you're doing, given it was not a condition of approval of the PUD. The path on the western side was a condition of the PUD. So I think I'm very supportive of a work session. I think we can definitely work through it, but I think we all need to get on the same page.
Dana, with that, thanks, Angie. With that said, I know our work session agendas are pretty packed, but I know I'd be willing to at least meet a little earlier at an upcoming Monday night meeting if the council is, just to try to bring some resolution to this issue because it is rather time sensitive.
I'm in for that.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a look. I think we could do an earlier one for June 19th. July 5th. Let me just pull 1 second. Let me get so I know what I'm saying here.
July 3rd.
Sure, July. Yeah, the first meeting in July. That one. We do not have a work session scheduled. We were going to move the strategic plan there, but to be honest, while a high priority, this would come first. And so we could, how long do you think for this item? Half an hour, 45 minutes?
Yeah.
So maybe we would have to start, give us at least an hour for the strategic plan, we'd probably have to start at 5:15.
On
July 3rd.
We can't do June 19th?
We could. We have the legislative update. We could we could potentially do it that day. I think for the legislative update, we need probably at least an hour.
And I won't be here on that
Yeah.
meeting, so
Oh,
you
okay.
probably need me there. I'm sorry. I have
That's
a
fine. That's
Surgery
fine.
scheduled the next day, so.
Understood. Can we, excuse me, can we add it to the
July.
budget meeting? Or is that just too
I mean,
much?
I think that might be long for you guys, because that starts at 5:30. We probably won't get done till 8:30, so if you
Okay,
add
let's
that,
go
you'll be
with
going
July
till 9.
3rd. We'll go with July 3rd.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I think we've been working with them, and it's just, you know, the fact is it has to be delayed some. It is what it is. You know, a lot of
Yep.
it comes down to maintenance of the, we know we have Sky Park Bridge and another bridge, and we don't have maintenance plans for them, so there was quite a few staff concerns aside from the lease with BNSF, so there's a lot of things to talk about.
Great. We'll go ahead and schedule that then for the July 3rd meeting. On a brighter note, I was up on the Haskell Trail up on Reservoir Trailhead, and it was the 5-year anniversary since that trail system was integrated into the Whitefish Trail system last month, 5 years ago. So a big congratulations to everyone that worked on that project, the conservation easement in particular. While I was riding, however, it kind of occurred to me, Craig, would there ever be an opportunity to petition the county to do a striped dedicated bike lane on Reservoir Road to connect in with our city trail system on Wisconsin Avenue? There's certainly the width.
We've asked on a couple of occasions. The city has asked, Legacy Partners has asked, and the response was, well, we'll give you the share the road signs. And so that's what we have.
What if we offered to stripe it ourselves?
If we offered to stripe it and maintain it, there may be some wiggle room there, but honestly, I'm not sure that there is the width. I think we'd have to look at that.
I mean, even a narrow path would be better than the situation that we have now, where bikers and runners are all over the road system.
Yeah, I could look into that.
Do you mind?
Yeah.
I mean, I would certainly be willing as a city to offer up the striping and maintenance. It's a pretty nominal fee. Is that supportive of the council? Yep, okay. Thanks, Craig. I appreciate that. And I'm happy to reach out to the commissioners as well if you'd rather me handle that.
Let me start with Dave Prunty, who's the
Yeah.
Public Works Director for the county, and see what he has to say.
Awesome. On that note, not to add anything more to your list, but and I don't know if it's under our jurisdiction or DOT's, but the pedestrian crossing at Cougar Ridge on Wisconsin, the lights aren't illuminating, so no longer functioning. That's all I had tonight. Anything further from staff? How about council? On that note, thanks very much, everyone. We are adjourned.